Hello, everybody. Hello, everybody. Yeah, it's one of those. Isn't this great? I came in here, I thought this is just like, my big fat Greek wedding or something. I feel incredibly underdressed. Well, what an amazing place this is to be. What did I want to talk to you about? We wanted to talk to you about the journey that Philips has been on around consumption-based infrastructure. And I'm sure some of you will have heard some of this before. It's been an amazing journey that we've been on, and I'd like to be as honest as I possibly can in sharing those experiences and learnings with you. So I'd start off with this. Love is a verb and a noun. You love somebody, you're in love, and so is cloud. And so my first thing is to understand that when we look at this, you can look at cloud as if it's a noun or as if it's a verb. And either is good, but depending on which you choose, the route to value will be different for your organization. Before I joined Philips, I spent 3 years at ING, and in banking and financial services, generally, you'll find that cloud is a noun, but with a company like Philips, we're very much into cloud as a verb. So what's the difference? Well, first of all, we have to start with this. I saw this on Facebook and I couldn't resist it, because I think this is the essence of every conversation. There is no cloud, it's just other people's computers. And the reason I like this is not because it's just smart ass, but because you get different conversations. So if you say, guys, we should use the cloud, you get a slightly different reaction if you say, guys, we need to use other people's computers a lot more than we are today. And people look at you and they react differently. And within Philips, we want to use as many of other people's computers as we possibly can. Now, so cloud is a noun. If you're in that type of strategy, then usually the CIO is going to be aligned with the CFO. It's used to improve efficiency and the efficacy of the IT infrastructure. It's not incredibly ambitious from a business perspective. It's usually a metaphor for the internet. So it's really like, time sharing over the internet. The conversation's about OpEx versus CapEx, and you spend a lot of time talking about virtualization, hypervisors, hybrid, private, public cloud. Perfectly legitimate way of working. It is the way I think that you find certainly in financial services. When you look at us, we think cloud is a verb, which means that the CIO is aligned much more with the business leaders. And what we're doing with the cloud is we're enabling a different type of agility, a different type of functionality in the business. And it's probably no secret for people who have been coming to these events that the CIO who kicked this off is now the CEO of the healthcare business. So I think it's a very successful strategy individually as well as for the company. And basically, we're leveraging other people's computers, external ecosystems, to create disruptive business propositions, which means that we spend a lot of our time talking about how do we specify, how do we acquire, and how do we orchestrate those systems. Of course, key to that is building high-volume transport networks that allows you to share data across those clouds and across those geographies. Our focus very much is on consumption. We'll come back to that in a second. And at the end of it, we don't measure this in terms of cost savings, but we measure this in terms of speed and agility that we bring to the business. Everybody with me up to now? Yep, good. Great. So everybody knows Philips is still, until the end of next year, a very large, complicated company. A very large range of high-tech machines right down to basic consumer devices and light bulbs. And some years ago, in 2013, Frans van Houten looked at this 123-year-old company and said, you know what, we are underperforming in the market. And Frans is somebody who knows this. His father was on the board. He's lived and breathed Philips. He went away and came back. And basically he said, we have to think much more as an entity. And up until that point, every Philips company was a separate institution, had its own SAP system, its own CRM systems, its own way of doing things. So the Accelerate program was to create a series of end-to-end processes that would be shared across lighting, across consumer lifestyle, and across healthcare. The core of that is these platforms underneath. The most important one, the most important initial one was the Philips integrated landscape. Oh, what happened there? Oh, I'm going backwards. Sorry. And the Philips integrated landscape defined the platforms for R&D, idea to market, market to order, order to fulfillment to cash. Each of these platforms are cloud-based platforms, and so essentially Philips is moving towards a 5-platform company, which is built around Force.com, around Windchill, around SAP, and around Workday, and a digital suite. As we progress through that, the discussions for a second platform have emerged, which is where Jeroen Tuss is now, which is the Digital Health Suite platform. That's how we create the digital propositions, I'll come back to that in a second, that actually make a difference to Philips' success in the marketplace. And supporting both of these is the common infrastructure and operating platform, which is, again, a logical step. If you're creating these platforms end-to-end across the company, it's logical that you would also create a common infrastructure and operating platform based on cloud. So that's, within that landscape, the emphasis up until now has really been around systems of record and systems of reference for us. Which are those 4? Of course, now we are going to go to health tech and lighting. That's the split that's underway now. And the good news is all of that work that we've done before is useful for what we're going to do next, because we're already down the track of creating common end-to-end processes. So when you merge consumer lifestyle with the legacy healthcare business, then it becomes a lot easier to actually make these types of transitions. As we went through this process, there was a conclusion reached before I joined that 85% of Philips' IT spend is non-differentiating, which essentially means that it doesn't contribute to extra revenue and it doesn't really reduce cost. And that's a very painful message, certainly to a CIO, that 85% of what you are spending is of no use to Philips. No use to Philips in the longer term. And that was a tough message for Philips, because for a long time we had believed that we're special, unique, different. And what you then find out is only 15% of what you're spending, and within Philips it's probably around $1 billion a year that you're spending, that 850 million of that is wasted essentially. So the goal is to eliminate that and to abolish all the non-differentiating systems we have, and instead build and innovate on existing systems as are provided by others. So using other people's computers, and use it more effectively than we were doing ourselves. And then the 15% that's differentiating, that needs to get focused, because that's really what makes a difference to us in the marketplace. So our strategy was to leverage the market. The first thing that means is to end the do-it-yourself, not-invented-here syndrome. Very difficult in a company like Philips. Anybody who's been to the high-tech campus has probably heard over and over again, it's the smartest square mile in the world. It still creates more patents than Silicon Valley. Very, very smart people. And with all of those smart people comes lots of opinions. And all of those opinions find their way also into technology, about why they know better, a little bit better than Cisco, a little bit better than IBM, a little bit better than Atos, a little bit better than everybody else, because we're so damn smart. So now we've got to stop that, and we've got to get back and we've got to trust these people, because we're going to use their computers. They're not ours anymore. It's got to be output-based. So a big transition for us is not telling people how to do stuff. We have a lot of people who were telling people how to do stuff. Even when we outsourced it, we were still telling them and still checking to make sure they were doing it the way we would have done it if we still did it ourselves. Now we work on output-based services. It has to be a catalog of standard market capabilities. So please don't build anything very specific for Philips. It's consumption-based, so we only pay for what we use. It's rooted in cloud, and it has to be regional as well as global. So before this, we had this strategy of one supplier, get with them, do it globally. That has failed miserably for us. The labor arbitrage also failed, because what ended up happening was that the expensive Western Europe was subsidized by the cheaper Asia countries and African countries, and then they were no longer competitive when they were buying those same services. So we had to go regional and global, and we knew there would be no single winner. It would be a supply chain with different people in it. Now, one of the first things we've learned is cloud is not fog. And I know there's probably some suppliers in the room who are selling fog today. And I apologize up front. But you know, how many people will come to you and say, I've got this cloud system, and you look at it, and what is it? It's basically an on-premise system with an internet connection, and they'll call it cloud, and it's bullshit. And you've got to work your way through that, because you'll find it very quickly, these people are not able to scale, they can't do consumption-based, they want you to actually pay for all the investments that you do. Luckily at Philips, we do have an air purifier, so we're very good at reducing this cloud. And so what we did essentially was we got everybody into a room. We got everybody into a room, all the different suppliers, for 3 days across the world. So Amazon, Google, IBM, Atos, anybody you could think of were in that room. And we tried to figure out what it needed to look like. And what we did was a very straightforward yellow sticky exercise. So everybody's done those. You write it down and you put it on the wall. And then everybody got to vote. So everybody got to vote. So it's really the market at work. And of course, what normally happens, what were the 5 things? So when we voted and we tallied all the votes, these were the 5 things that the market, so Amazon, Google, IBM, Atos, everybody agrees is what makes up real cloud. Now there's another bunch, but I could only get the top 5 or else you can't focus. So pay only for what you use, have elasticity, scalability up and down, also of course horizontally, real-time visibility to usage and performance, self-provisioning consumer style, and no required minimum and no termination commitments. So you get to the end of the 3 days and you've written all that stuff down, and you all know what normally happens when you go away from those sessions. All the yellow stickies get binned. Somebody says, well, I'm going to make some minutes at some point and I'm going to send some action items, and then nothing ever happens until the next yellow sticky session. So what I did, though, I went back to the hotel in New York and said, you know what? We need to capture the moment. And what I did was I came back with this, which was a charter. And I said to everybody, before I showed them to her, I said, everybody agreed yesterday that this was what it was? Okay, now I want you to sign it. I want you to sign it because this is the way that we are going to work with each other in the next few years. And the first person to sign was Amazon, as you would expect. But everybody since then who does business with us, certainly from an infrastructure perspective, has signed this. So it became symbolic and it became really, really important. And this is only possible when you actually start to work together, not just with the IT people and the vendors, but also with your procurement teams, with your legal teams, with your compliance teams, to really start to make this work. This is what our architecture looks like. It is a sort of Mickey Mouse type architecture, but it gives you an idea of what we're trying to do. So at the top layer, you see the digital world, and the digital world exists with or without Philips. Underneath that digital world, you have digital domains. Great example for us that's relevant to us is the home hospital connection. That's a digital domain. It also exists with or without Philips. A lot of different players are in there. And then you have the digital propositions, and that is very specific to Philips. So those are the things that Philips believes will differentiate it in those domains to win in the digital world. All of those things are supported by 7 clouds. The clouds are around data analytics, collaboration, device security, compute, and storage. And they're not one cloud. They are conceptual clouds. You could have various different suppliers working within those clouds around different propositions. And of course, in order to manage that cloud, you have the control space. And the control space is becoming increasingly important. Because if you see what we still have to really understand, when all of our stuff is on other people's computers, there is still stuff we have to do, and we have to do it actually a lot better, because now your supply chain is essentially virtualized. It's virtualized on other people's computers. And there's a lot of nasty people out there who want to get into that supply chain and wreak havoc with it. So you see that in the control plane, all the aspects of risk and security and compliance, your regular operations activities, orchestration, logging, monitoring, and of course your service management. Although service management in this type of setup is much more about aggregating, coordinating, and escalating than you're doing that because you're running on other people's computers and they're doing the service management there for you. This is one chart, it's probably not even up to date, which shows you what's happening. So everything that's green is where a supplier is actually delivering stuff to us today. And I said it's not up to date. But right now we've probably got, of our run rate, about 100 million a year that is externally spent with cloud suppliers. Most of it is with public cloud suppliers. So this is cloud as a verb, which is phase one. So phase one is connecting everybody to us. And that's the process that we're in. Hurry up. What this has done for us, this is how we kind of started out with our data centers. But clearly, now, with all of these suppliers, we now have data centers everywhere. Hundreds of them in potential. And the interesting thing as you draw this diagram, or you see this diagram emerge, is not that you have a lot more choice, but you have actually less choice than you thought you were going to have. Because what I've found is that all of the suppliers are all in the same place. So what you do have is you have these regional centers of data in these areas, in Sao Paulo, in Singapore, in South Africa. You can see where they are. But if you want to go to Tanzania, or you want to go to Colombia, or you want to go to Mongolia, still a bit of a challenge. Can we succeed fast and fail cheaply? This is a real diagram that was our order to cash in LATAM, cloud-based SAP application. And what you see here is if we'd have done this in a classic way, we would have had to spend CapEx on the project startup costs, we would have had to buy stuff, and we'd have to run stuff. We didn't have any of that, which meant we avoided 750K of CapEx on this particular project, and our run rate to the business is about 550K a year, under what it would have been by classic. But not only that, two other things, come back to this agility and speed, two other things that are important. One was, when we started this, IT were on the critical path, and everybody was very, very concerned about us and our ability to deliver. So pressure. We delivered, and the business wasn't ready. In fact, the business wasn't ready for 3 months. If we'd have done this in a classic way, we'd have had to support that, we'd have been licensing, we'd have been depreciating, we'd have been whirring. Now we didn't spend anything. And now it gets a little bit critical because now we're in the split, and there are going to be conversations about these applications. Do you still need them? Now, in this particular case, if we don't, we can turn it off and go to zero. Don't have to write anything down, write anything off, don't have to disconnect anything, we can just turn it to zero. So that was what I said before. So the other thing you are doing here is you're putting data back in data centers. And there's another presentation that sort of goes with this, which really talks about how the emergence of big data and how this is an essential move. I don't have time to talk about it today. But what you see is when you start to talk about big data, that the underlying infrastructure strategy is going to give you a whole different set of opportunities than a traditional big data lake to attack that. So the last thing is we're preparing for the future. Because as we learn these things, as we learn things like orchestration, as we learn things like consumption-based, as we learn things like how do we create flexible supply chains, it's going to enable Philips to get into new worlds. So for 123 years, the R&D has been centered around Eindhoven. Today, the R&D could be two Indian guys with a smartphone in Delhi. And in the old days, what you do is you try and emulate them. You say, what are they doing? Oh, we can do that because we're smart. And if you couldn't do that, you'd buy them. Now, in the future, you just want to connect to them. You want to make them part of your supply chain as quickly as you can to leverage that. And that technology is going to be available, and it's going to change our lives around all of these major themes. All of this is a paradigm shift, and it means a lot to us to learn. Consumption-based software is the next thing we have to deal with. It's great having consumption-based infrastructure, but if our dev team still have to sign an ELA for 2 years to get something up and running, then it's still not acceptable. High-value transport networks are important. How do we make those work better than today? Orchestration, I mentioned it, absolutely critical. And I'm not just talking about spinning up a server in 5 seconds. What I'm really talking about is orchestrating supply chains. How do you do that? How do you template that? How do you make that work? Unified compliance. We've struggled a lot with this, a lot. because there's a lot of people in Philips deal with compliance, whether it's HIPAA or FDA or export control or SOX. A lot of discussions around how do we do that. We've chosen for unified compliance. I talked about advanced security. And the other one, which is really important if you're going to use public cloud, is application synchronicity. So if you want to run, for instance, Oracle on Amazon, you have to be on RDS. You don't go to RDS, you are not upgradable. So you lose the value of the cloud. That's a big issue when you start to look at things like your legacy systems. Because if you're on Oracle 10, you're screwed. You've got to be on RDS. So those are all things you have to think about. I don't have time to go through all of these, but there are a few. Going down this route for us has meant, first of all, it's a complete new world for the suppliers. Even though all the suppliers are battering down your door with the slideware about how cloudy they are, it's really tough for them to get off of ELAs. It's really tough for them to come to terms with there are no termination fees. Depending on the vendor or supplier, it's very difficult for them to give you a standard catalog. It's always fun to ask IBM for their standard catalog. But Amazon obviously does have it. A new world for Philips staff, because our engineers and our architects don't architect and engineer because we're using other people's computers. But they do have to understand other people's computers. So the skill set is still relevant. It just has to be pivoted. And what else do I have? And a new word for legal. Because the first thing that legal has to deal with is that we can't just send our contract and say everything's under Dutch law. Because you just get it back saying, well, don't use us then. So so the legal people have a big mindset change on how do we now work with this. And some of our legal people are a little lazy. They're used to just sending our forms and getting them signed. And of course, now they've got to look at other people's forms and they've got to be agile and make sure we're not getting caught out. And we've had some very interesting discussions around non-assert clauses with Amazon, for instance, to protect our IP, which Google didn't have, which was luckily caught and negotiated down. And the last one, I think, is also for your procurement team. Because what happens here, and procurement has been an incredibly important partner for us on this journey, because they have to give up the concept of RFPs. And that's been the way we've worked for 30 years. It doesn't mean we give up the concept of contestability, of competition, of quality. But what it now means is you have to use the market. You can't write RFPs anymore because you want standard catalog responses, which means you also have to get a lot smarter with procurement in your specifications and definitions. So all of that is going on right now. So I said, for us, cloud is a verb. We're looking at standard offerings. The focus is on agile. We have to look more outside in than inside out. We're building the supply chain of the future. I do believe ultimately as we start to get to this big data conversation that what we're going to find is despite all the progress in things like CRM and M2O and Salesforce and so, that the really strategic information is ultimately open sourced. And bringing together huge sources of data that are not controlled in your own data center is going to be really, really important. And that's why this strategy is also key for the future. And really what we're doing now is learning now to leverage all of this for the future. Thank you very much.